Our first story takes us to both Marysville and Kirkland, Washington. On our website, we covered Marysville last week. There's a story that went to press at 7:55 tonight, so you can go and read it after the show, not right now, but you can go ahead and read it after the show, and you can actually read that at malcontentnews.com. And in that story, we've highlighted the two incidents that are going on in Marysville and Kirkland. And we met with Dr. Janice Green, who is the president of the NAACP in Snohomish County. We had a great conversation with her about what is going on in Marysville. To summarize real quickly, and then we'll go into Dr. Green's interview, in Marysville back in December, in a Zoom meeting where students were together for a leadership club, some white students basically were making a hit list, making death threats to black students and going through a list of going, we're going to kill this student. We're not going to kill that student. Yeah, let's kill that student. And there were black students on the call. After that meeting, two students were disciplined. They received school suspensions and they were moved to a different high school. That wasn't enough, because what happened next was a more sinister threat on Snapchat involving a white hand holding a pistol being sent from the same Snapchat account of one of the juveniles involved in the December incident, with the caption, "Ready to kill minorities." If you're not familiar with Marysville Pilchuck High School, Marysville Pilchuck High School was the scene of a mass shooting back in 2014. It ended up with 5 students dead. It was also the scene in 2018 of a brawl that required a very large police presence and the school being put on lockdown and then shut down early at 12:45 p.m. The massacre in the cafeteria in 2014 was so bad, Marysville Pilchuck High School had to build a new cafeteria. And with that, Jennifer, and that kind of explanation, we're going to go ahead and roll our interview with Dr. Green, and then we're also going to talk about what's going on in Kirkland. Dr. Janice Green of the NAACP of Snohomish County, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking to you today about this ongoing incident that's happened at Marysville Pilchuck High School. Could you give us a little bit of background on that story?
In December, there was a student in a leadership forum class that they started discussing killing Black people. And they had names of people that they planned on killing. And then they said, well, we're going to kill these ones. Yes, these ones. Yes. Well, not this one. It was a Zoom meeting. The teacher, I believe, wasn't in there that came back. And actually, it was reported.
The situation wasn't rectified after that. The situation continued to escalate, and there's now a number of people involved, and with what we understand, additional threats.
A couple of months later, there's a young man with a hand on the gun saying, "Killing minorities soon." And one of the students actually took that Snapchat, took a screenshot of the Snapchat, said that she was afraid and wanted it taken care of. It was not taken care of. They're saying that it wasn't that child's fault, that he didn't do that another person who's 20 years old took that photo on his account. And then it comes out later that that person with the hand on the gun that said "killing minorities soon" is a 20-year-old son of a police officer. So it gets deeper and deeper as we move through.
Just to clarify, when you say it's not a 20-year-old police officer, but a relative of a city of Marysville police officer?
That's what they say. They say it's a relative of a city of Marysville police officer. And the reason that they're not investigating in Marysville is that there would be a conflict of interest. So they turned it over to the sheriff's office.
Marysville Pilchuck High School is no stranger to gun violence.
They had a shooting sometime back, a little while back, a few years back. They have a heightened awareness, or should have a heightened awareness, of what can happen with young people and guns in schools and school shootings. So they've had one. I think that they are concerned, and I've heard them voice the concern. But for somehow or the other, they said they took this young man through a threat assessment and found that they didn't consider him a threat.
Dr. Green, it seems in this day and age, where a 20-year-old would have grown up going through active school shooter drills through their entire educational experience, seeing the headlines of everything that goes on in this country, and being an adult would understand the significance of a Snapchat holding a gun saying, going to kill minorities soon.
Here you have our kids getting ready to go back to school. They're going to be face to face. You've got people threatening their lives, and there doesn't seem to be anything happening immediately. Now, when you ask about the investigation will be finished sometime in April. But you're sending our kids back into school with threats hanging in the air, with people not being held accountable, with the people not having to deal with the consequences of their behavior. And so what message are you sending to them? That their lives are just not that important, or you don't care that much? I would be very concerned about sending my children to school with those type of death threats hanging in the air.
What does the NAACP of Snohomish County want to have happen out of this incident?
And we would like to see appropriate charges, appropriate action for the for the young people that made the threats, for the 20-year-old that was holding the gun. We want to have that happen. We also want to hold the school district accountable. We'd also like to, for the entire Snohomish County, look at putting some type of oversight so that we can see what's going on outside of the school districts. So you have a community type oversight so we can address these issues when they come up. This isn't the only thing that's happening. Children of color are going to school. They don't feel protected. And how do you learn in that environment? And I'm going to say Marysville right now is at the crux of it, but they're not the only ones. And so I would be remiss if I just blame them. But this is a place where we can learn how to handle this type of action. And one of the things that I really am concerned about is that we keep pulling our young people that are traumatized, racially traumatized, and we want them to come out in front of people that really don't care that much. Otherwise, they would have done something and tell their stories over and over again. So we want to re-traumatize our children. And then we have people that want to hear those stories, but then they're not really taking the necessary action. So that's one of the things that we want to make sure happens. But, this time we're not going to forget, and we're not going to let it go, and we're going to stay right here.
Dr. Janice Green, thank you so much for joining us. Great conversation about a difficult topic, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And she makes some really great points about, concern for the safety of these children returning to school with nothing being done about these threats, no consequences for these actions.
One of the things that she said in that interview was that Marysville, of course, is not exclusive with this, which provides this great segue for what's going on in Kirkland. So in Kirkland, there was a racial incident that happened last year, right at the start of the year, involving a black student, a female white student, and either a faculty member or a security guard. We're working on kind of sorting that out. And the Lake Washington School District has been very, very tight-lipped on that story. In that incident, the black student was called the N-word. When this faculty member, or in an escalating event that was just beyond the racial slur, when this faculty member or security guard got there, the black student was also called the N-word. At the end of the day, the black student was the one who was punished. There is no information on were there any consequences for the faculty member or the female student, and COVID hit. And so this story and what's happened is the story has reemerged as high school students are getting ready to go back to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a particularly dangerous time right now because students have been outside of the classroom for so long and allowed to behave in various ways. I mean, that particular story, of course, it's swept under the rug because COVID hits, and now it's resurfacing because people really need to be concerned and have legitimate concerns about sending their children back to school in this climate, this extremely hostile climate. I mean, I was talked a little bit about last week about there being a similar incident at the high school my daughter attends, Roosevelt. We've seen that there's a lack of consequences for what's occurred at Marysville Pilchuck. And I think one of the things that she brought up that was very interesting is that the 20-year-old that supposedly took the Snapchat or was on his account or whatever is actually the son of a police officer. So these are very troubling things. And, when there's not any consequences, how are BIPOC children supposed to feel safe in school when they know that these people that are making these kinds of threats and harassment and, very kind of racist remarks, not kind of actual racist remarks, are not going to be receiving punishment for their actions.
Well, you've brought up a really good point. In the last COVID hit, then you had the death of George Floyd. You had the equivalent of the Long Hot Summer Part 2. 1968 was the Long Hot Summer for people who aren't familiar where that phrase comes from. 2020 was Long Hot Summer Part 2. But everybody was in their respective corners, so to speak, and interacting in a tighter and tighter circle and a more polarized circle. My concern is that there has not been a reckoning and a rationalization. And here in Washington State, we are 21 days away of putting them all back together in classrooms. And they have been around their collective dinner tables, either talking about Black Lives Matter, equality, LGBTQIA issues, death of George Floyd. And at the other table, they're talking about overthrowing the government.
Exactly. It's a very, they're going to come back, kids are going to come back with, they're so easily influenced. I mean, kids my children's age, my kids are 14 and 17. They're so impressionable and, still developing in their ideas. And so if you have, people at home or people who are constantly in their circle, continuously preaching hate and racism and transphobia and these things, these are the ideas that they're going to carry back with them when they return to school. And that's going to be reflected in the way that they behave towards people who they believe fit those particular stereotypes. And that's a very dangerous situation.
It is a very dangerous situation. One of our commenters, Kimberly, brought up, has anybody even considered that teenagers now have grown up going through school shooter drills? So they know the tactics that are going to be employed to protect faculty, students, and teachers and police response. So at what point do we see a smarter mass shooter? Because the next school shooting is not a if. It's a when.
Exactly. My kids are not returning to brick and mortar school this year. I've elected to keep them out for the rest of the year. They're doing online schooling for various reasons, but I think this is going to be a very difficult transition back to this kind of brick and mortar, see everybody environment that children have been out of for so long.
Well, we will continue to monitor the situation. We will continue to monitor the situation in Kirkland. There is a story that is up on our website. That's at malcontentnews.com. Story went live before the show.